Hello crafters and welcome to Sasha K Creations. Before we start, I'm just gonna go through all of the materials that we'll be using for this project. The first thing is some hard chipboard, and you can use whatever thickness you prefer. We'll also be using 12 to 15 sheets of some white cardstock and of course the Roses and Laces collection from Stamperia. We're only gonna use 6 sheets for this mini album. We're also gonna use some Tyvek or some thin fabric that doesn't rip. And then we're gonna use a thin paper bag, some score tape, and some foam tape, some glue. I'll be using bookbinding glue, some glossy accents, some antique linen distress oxide to ink the edges, and an ink tool, 20 12mm magnets, and 4 5mm magnets. Four flat metal corners, a metal closure, 4 smaller metal corners to go around the cover, 2 small bracts, and also 2 small screws. You're also gonna need a working surface that you can cut on. I'll be using this media mat from Tim Holtz, a paper cutter. This is the rotary cutter from Fiskars, and a paper trimmer for the smaller pieces of paper, a scoreboard. This one has an envelope maker, some rulers. I'll be using the Tim Holtz ruler and a metal ruler, some scissors, a sharp knife, pliers, a poking tool, a bone folder, a pencil with an eraser, a acrylic block with a sharp edge, and a tap die or a tap punch, a corner punch, and an envelope punch, a border punch. I'll be using one from Martha Stewart with the corner punch as well, but you could also use a die if you prefer that, and a cloth or small towel. The first thing I'm doing is putting 2 pieces of cardstock together with the score tape. I'm putting the first piece as close to the edge as possible, and then I'm using my acrylic block to make a straight edge at the end of the score tape. Now it's important that you don't go over the edge with the tape, but if you do, you just cut off the excess piece. And now I'm just placing another piece of tape right next to the other one. And it's really important that you burnish your score tape to get all of the air bubbles out. And I'm using my bone folder for this. I want this to be as straight as possible, so I'm gonna take out my scoreboard. Then I'm gonna lay the cardstock against this edge. And now I'm placing the piece with the tape underneath the other one. And then I'm just peeling a little bit of this off at the bottom of the paper. I'm not peeling all of it off yet because I want to make sure that the cardstock is right where I want it to be before they are stuck together. Now I'm making sure it's straight and that the top piece only covers the part with the tape. And that's right about here. And now I can peel off the rest of this. And again, it's really important that you burnish this so that you're sure it's stuck really good together. Now I'm gonna find my chipboard, and I already cut mine. I'm using two pieces that are 6¼ by 6¼ for the front and back, and a piece that is 1¼ by 6¼ for the spine. And now I'm measuring about an inch from the edge of the cardstock to make a straight line to know where the bottom of my chipboard is going to be. And I'm using my metal ruler to mark out the line. And I'm just making sure that it looks good before I glue down my chipboard to the cardstock. And I am going around the edge with the square tape, and again I am going as close to the edge as possible without going over the edge. I'm adding a couple of more pieces of the tape, and for the rest of the chipboard I'm going to use glue. While I'm doing this, I just want to apologize for those of you who's been waiting forever for a tutorial. But as some of you already know, I just had a baby 6 weeks ago, and I already have a 1-year-old daughter and a 3-year-old son. And of course, family always comes first. I'm going to use 2 pieces of some leftover chipboard to make sure that I have enough space in between these pieces to bend the cover without cracking the paper. And I'm adding some glue in between the scored tape. I'm doing this as quickly as I can because this kind of glue, it dries a little fast. And now I'm making sure that I lay it down just above the line that I drew before. Make sure it's stuck really good, and remember to burnish and get all of the air out from underneath. I'm going to do the same thing with the spine piece. Adding some glue. And then I am taking the 2 leftover pieces and putting them in between. And I am going to lay down my spine piece and kind of push it all together a little. And now remember to make sure that it follows the line before you press it all the way down. Make sure it's stuck. And I'm going to do the same thing with the last piece. Add some glue, push it together, press it down, and make sure it's stuck. And now I just have to cut off the excess piece of cardstock. And I'm just going to leave about an inch to the edge of the chipboard. And I am saving this piece for later. Now I'm gonna take my piece of fabric and I'm gonna glue it to the inside of the cover to give it a little more strength. As you can see, this piece of fabric, it doesn't rip or tear. I actually don't really know what it is, but it came wrapped around some glass poles I got in the mail, and I thought, hey, I could probably use this. It works really well with the glue, as the glue kind of soaks into the fabric. And I don't think that the scored tape will hold onto it as well. But if you use some Tyvek instead of fabric, I think that the scored tape works better. Make sure that you use enough glue and that all of the fabric is glued down to the chipboard. And I'm just gonna speed it up again because this part is a little boring to watch, but just repeat on the other side and make sure that it's nice and smooth. And wipe up any excess glue from your tools and from the cover. And now we're ready to wrap the edges of the cardstock around the, the chipboard. And I'm just slowly loosening up the fibers of the paper so that it won't rip if I just try to fold it. I'm gonna cut off the corners about a quarter of an inch from the corner of the chipboard. And I'm gonna throw these out. And again, I'm just working with the paper and making it a little more soft, I guess. And I'm kind of pulling it over the chipboard. And I'm just gonna add some of the squirt tape as close to the chipboard as possible. And then I'm adding another piece at the edge of the paper. And I am burnishing it down, bending it a little more. Now I'm gonna peel these off and add some glue in between. And I'm also adding a little glue right at the edge of the chipboard. And then I'm just pulling it over the edge, starting from the middle and going towards the ends. And I'm making sure that there's no air bubbles underneath. And the same thing on the other side. And again, I'm just gonna speed it up a little. Wrapping the corners of the chipboard can be a little tricky. You're gonna wanna flatten the paper down and at the same time kind of push it towards the middle. And you're gonna add your glue and your tape and kind of tug it over the corners and make sure it's nice and tight. And burnishing. And then I'm gonna add my glue. I'm making sure that there's absolutely no air bubbles underneath and that it's nice and smooth. And then I'm just gonna remove excess glue with my wet wipe. And then of course I'm doing the same thing on the other side. Now I still need to cover the last showing bit of chipboard. So I'm just gonna find my paper cutter and a new sheet of cardstock. I'm gonna cut this sheet at 6 inches. And then I'm gonna take the long piece that I just cut off and cut that at 6 inches. And I'm just gonna put away my paper cutter and get my media mat. And one of the little rubber things just fell off, so I am just gonna add that back on. And now I have my 2 pieces of cardstock, the big piece and the smaller piece. Now I'm just gonna make sure that they fit perfectly before adding my tape. Now, as you can see, the small piece is just big enough to cover the last part. I'm just going to use my bone folder to kind of press down where I want the cover to bend. Then I'm going to glue down the big piece of cardstock. I'm going to use the squirt tape all around the edge, and I'm also going to add some smaller pieces to go across. And I think I have about an inch of empty space in between where I am going to add my glue. I'm just starting with half of the paper so that my glue doesn't dry too quickly. I laid down the non-sticky side and made sure that the paper was where I wanted it to be before I pressed it down. And now I'm gonna do the same thing on the other side, peeling off all of these pieces and adding my glue and pressing it down and making sure that there's no bubbles. Now I just need to glue down the small piece of cardstock and then I'm gonna have the base cover finished. Then I only need to make the hinge system and decorate the cover and make the pages and the insert. So almost done. I'm just going around the edge with the squirt tape and adding another piece in the middle. And then I'm just filling in with the glue and just pressing down the last piece of paper. Making sure that it's nice and straight and burnishing it down. And I'm just making sure that it's nice and smooth. And I always forget to close my glue, so I'm just going to do that. And then again, I am just pressing down where the cover is going to bend to help the paper so it doesn't rip. And then I'm carefully bending the cover. I'm doing this slowly so I don't tear the outside of the paper. Now I think this looks pretty good. Then we are gonna start making the hinge system. Now this album only has 4 pages, so we actually only need to make one flap thing. So I'm gonna start by getting my my baby cutter. I'm sorry, I'm sitting with my baby on my lap and he just burped. So I'm gonna take a new sheet of cardstock and I'm cutting it down to 6 by 7 inches. I really do like my rotary cutter, but I think it's so annoying that the fold is right between 5.5 inches and 6 inches. Usually when I work with 12 by 12 papers, I almost always cut them in half, so the 6-inch mark would be so great to have on this cutter. But anyways, I'm gonna score my hinge piece. Make sure that it's straight in the corner, and I'm gonna score at 1 1/4, at 2, at 3 1/2, at 5, and at 5 3/4. And then I'm gonna flip it over, and I'm gonna score again at 2 3/4 and at 4 1/4. If you fold it at all of the score lines the right way, you should have something that looks like this. I'm kind of just pulling it together and smoothing it out. And now I have these two small flaps to go on each side of the page. And when you fold this up, don't do it with your bone folder, because we don't want the folds to get too sharp. When you pick it up, it should look like this, kind of like a drunk eagle with broken wings. Now I'm just gonna see if I folded it correctly, and if I did, it should fit perfectly in the cover. And it does. And now I'm going to add some magnets to the back of the hinge. I started using this magnet hinge system because I wanted my pages to lie flat when I flipped through the album, but I also wanted my album to be able to stand up without the pages hanging down from all the weight. And now I'm just adding tiny bits of score tape just where I want my magnets to go. And I know it's a little hard to see when it's white on white, but I hope that you can see what I'm doing. I'm placing the magnets on the back of the hinge. I'm only using tiny bits of tape, just enough to make the magnets stick to the paper. Make sure to burnish, even though it's small pieces. We don't want the magnets to fall off. Now this is the hard part, peeling off all of these tiny bits. And now I'm gonna add my magnets. I always try to make sure that all of the magnets are facing the same way. I'm not sure if it's important or not, but that's just how I do it. And now I'm just doing the same thing on the other side. And of course, you don't have to have a magnetic hinge system. If you don't want to use a ton of magnets, you could just make whatever hinge system you prefer. Now I'm just gonna cut 2 small strips from this paper back It's important that it's as thin as possible so that the magnets don't lose too much of their strength. I'm only adding these small strips to make sure that the magnets don't fall off. The first time I tried making a magnetic hinge, I didn't add the paper back on top of the magnets. And when I glued in the hinge, the magnets started to come loose and stick together. So I had to add the paper back after I already glued it in, which was really difficult, as you probably can imagine. I'm cutting these strips just under 3/4 of an inch. You're not really going to be able to see the paper back when you glue in the hinge. So the important thing is just that the strips are wide enough to cover the magnets and that they don't stick out too much. Now I'm just going to rip off the excess part that I'm not going to be needing. I'm not going to use the part where the back is glued together because you don't want to have too many layers. I want the strips to be just under 6 inches long so that they're not going to stick out from underneath the paper. And now that I made sure that they're not too long, I'm just going to go ahead and add a little glue. And then I'm just going to place the strip right on top of the magnets. And I'm being a little careful so that I'm not gonna rip it. And I'm just wiping off the excess glue with my fingers. I'm pressing it down to make sure that there's no air and that it's stuck really good. And then I'm just gonna do the same thing with the other magnets. Don't forget to close your glue. And then I'm gonna add a new layer of magnets. These are the ones that are gonna be stuck to the cover. And now I'm adding small pieces of score tape to the magnets, making sure that they're stuck really good, and peeling off all of these. And I'm also adding score tape to the parts of the paper that are going to be stuck to the front and the back of the cover. It's really important that you don't add any tape or glue to the part in between the magnets, because we want the hinge to be flexible. Now I am being really careful when I'm putting this in, and I'm making sure that it's right where I want it before it's stuck. And then I'm gonna add pressure to each individual magnets to make sure that they are not gonna fall off in a minute when I'm taking off the hinge. And now I just need to add the paperback strips to the magnets in the cover before I glue in the hinge. And again, I am just trimming off the ends to make sure that they are not too long, and then I'm adding my glue and pressing the paper down on the magnets. Now remember to make sure that your hinge is turning the right way before gluing it in. Now I'm peeling these off, and then I'm gonna add the glue in between the pieces of score tape. And then I am just adding a small line of glue right before the fold of the paper. And as you can see, I am folding the cover up against the paper and not the paper down on the cover. And this is to make sure that you don't have your paper too tight. Because if it gets too tight, then when you close up the album, you're just gonna push away the magnets. And that is not what we want. I'm also softening the paper a little with my bone folder to make it a little easier to fold without moving the magnets out of place. And then I'm just gonna do the exact same thing on the other side. And again, it's really important that you work with the paper and soften it so you don't move anything out of place when you're trying to close your album. So now that the hinge is done, I am gonna make the page that's gonna go in between the hinge flaps. And this page is gonna have a pocket, so you're gonna need a fresh piece of cardstock. And I'm cutting this at 6 inches. Now I'm gonna score it right in the middle. And this sheet is just over 11 5/8, so I am gonna score it at 5 7/8. Now I'm gonna fold it in half, and I know that the score line isn't exactly in the middle of the paper, but you won't be able to see the ends anyway, so it doesn't really matter. And I'm just gonna make sure that the bottom is straight, and then I'm gonna go over it with my bone folder. And then I'm gonna add some score tape on the outside of this page, as close to the edge as possible on both ends. I want the page to be 6 inches wide, so I'm not gonna press the page all the way in between the flaps. I am just gonna peel off a little bit of this, and then I'm gonna measure from the bottom of the hinge to the edge of the page. And I want it to be 6 inches, so I maybe have to pull it a little bit. And when I'm sure that it's as wide as I want it to be, I am gonna peel off the rest of this, and then I'm gonna add a little bit of glue. So I'm sure that all of the hinge is stuck to the page. And then I'm just flipping over the page and doing the same thing with the other part of the hinge. And then I'm flipping it back and forth a couple of times just to loosen it up a bit. And then I am gonna add a really thin line of glue to the bottom of the page as far out to the edge as possible. And this is to make a big pocket in the page. And of course you don't want anything to fall out of the bottom. So now I have a blank album, and then I just need to decorate the cover. And later I am gonna make a insert to put in the pocket. I'm just gonna move my media mat, and then I'm gonna find sheet number 7 in the collection. It looks like this. And on the back side, it looks like this. And I'm gonna use the top part. So I'm just gonna take out my paper cutter. And the first thing I'm gonna do is to cut off the glue that holds all the sheets together. And I'm being really careful not to cut any of the paper off. I'm only cutting off the glue. As you can see, it's really thin. And then I'm just going to turn it so that the sheet is sideways. And then I'm going to cut it at 6 inches. I am saving the bottom piece for later. And then I'm going to turn the top part. And again, I am cutting it at 6 inches. I am using both of these pieces on the cover. This one is for the front and the other one is for the back. But right now I'm just gonna put it away for a moment, and then I'm going to find sheet number 8 in the collection. It looks like this with all of the cutouts, and on the back side it looks like this. And I'm going to use this part right here for the spine. And again, I am starting with cutting off the glue. And then I'm just gonna make sure that I got all of it. And I don't want to ruin too much of the other side with all the cutouts. So this time I am not gonna cut it all the way through. I'm gonna cut it at 6 inches, and then I'm gonna find my ruler, and then I'm gonna measure and only cut down 4 inches. And then I'm turning the sheet. And again, I want the part with the lace, and so I'm gonna lay it and cut it at 4 inches, and then I'm gonna cut it 6 inches down. And I'm saving the rest of the sheet for later. Now you have a piece that should look like this. I am gonna find my border punch, and then I'm gonna punch out the piece for the spine, and you can use whatever you want. If you have a border die or border punch, the important thing is just that it doesn't take more than 3/4 of an inch of your paper. And then I'm gonna ink the edges of all of the pieces. I don't have a lot of different colors, so I just chose this one, but I think that there is another one that maybe matches the paper a little bit better than this one. And then I'm adding glue to all of the page so that there's not gonna be any loose parts. And I am using a dry cloth to get all the air out from underneath, and also to take off any excess glue. And then I'm doing the same thing with the other piece. And now I'm going to add my piece for the spine, and I'm just making sure that it's going to fit properly before I glue it on. And now I'm adding glue only in the middle of the piece, just to cover the part that is gonna be on the spine. And I'm just folding it over the corner before gluing the rest of it down. And I'm also making sure that I'm getting the glue all in between the small holes in the pattern. And then I'm slowly folding it over the corner while the book is closed. This part is very important, because if you're doing it while the cover is laying flat, there's a bigger chance that your paper is going to crack. And then I'm just gonna glue down the other side. Now be careful when you're gonna open up the cover, and do it slowly, and make sure that your glue is dry before you do it. Now I'm gonna make the belt that is gonna hold the album closed, and I just took a random piece of paper from my scraps. And this measures 2.25 inches, and it's about 11 inches long. Now I'm gonna get out my scoreboard and I'm gonna score it 1/2 inch. And again at 1 3/4. I'm gonna put away my scoreboard and then I'm gonna fold the belt at the score lines. Now I'm gluing them all the way down to make one thick strip of cardstock. I don't want the belt to be too floppy. And I'm gonna go in with my bone folder and make sure that it's nice and flat and that the glue is evenly spread out. And then I'm gonna fold it about 1/2 inch from the end. And this is to make the edge a little bit nicer and to make it a little bit thicker, because this is where our metal clasp is going to be. And I'm just gonna fold in the corners and use my bone folder to make it as flat as possible. And then I am gluing it down and wiping off any excess glue. I am not really sure how to say what I'm doing now, but I don't want the belt to be too stiff. And this is gonna make it more flexible so that it can go around your album without making any wrinkles or sharp corners. And again, I'm gonna find sheet number 8 in the collection, and I am gonna use this border to cover up the belt, and I'm cutting 2 strips at 1 inch. The belt is a little too long, so I am just gonna trim off a bit, and I'm just eyeballing it. I want it to go from about the middle of the back to the middle of the cover. And then I'm inking the edges of the paper and snipping off the excess part, and then I'm just gonna glue it on. And before I glue on the other side, I'm just gonna go in with my bone folder again and make sure that it's still flexible, like so. And then I'm gonna find my middle clasp closure thing. I'm not sure what its name is, but it's the part with the hole in it. And I'm placing it about 1/8 of an inch from the edge. And I'm using my poke tool to mark where I want the holes to be, and then I remove the thingy and poke all the way through. And then I am putting my small brads through the holes to make them a little wider before I add the thingy. While I am pushing the heads from the other side, I am flattening out the tails with this metal stick. When I'm sure that it's not loose at all, I am gonna cut off the excess part from my paper strip and ink the edges before I glue it onto the back of the belt. And I am gonna make sure that the brat's tails are completely covered. Now the belt is done, but before I attach it, I am gonna work on the front cover so I'll know where exactly I want the closure to be. I'm using sheet number 4 in the collection for this. This is what it looks like, and I am gonna cut out this piece to put on the cover. I'm just going in with my scissors and cutting loosely around the edges. And then I am using my paper trimmer to get off all of the excess around the frame. And I am inking the edges before adding my glue. And I am just eyeballing it and placing it where I think it looks good. I'm going it with my towel and removing any excess glue. And then I am getting the other part of my closure and my tiny screws. And the reason I'm using screws instead of brads is because my brads are too short to go through this hook thing and the chipboard. I'm just figuring out where I want my closure to be. And I think it looks good right here where there's not too much going on the cutout. And I am gonna measure with my ruler to make sure that it's right in the middle. And I'm going in with my poke tool just to make some small holes for the screws to grab onto. And I have this really cool multi-tool that I am going to use to get my screws in. And of course, it's really important that your screws aren't too long because you don't want them to stick out on the other side. And as you can see, my screws are almost going through the chipboard and the paper, but luckily it's only almost, so you won't be able to see it when the album is done. Now it's time to attach the belt. So I'm hooking it on and then I'm carefully gonna bend the belt around the corners of the album. And I'm making sure that the space in between is about as wide as the spine. And of course, it's very important that this belt is stuck really good. So I am going to use 3 pieces of score tape, and then I'm also going to add some glue next to the score tape. I'm also putting a little bit of glue on top of the score tape. And the reason I'm doing that is because I can move it around a bit. I want to make sure that it's right in the middle. If you only use the square tape, you will only have one shot at getting this right, because it's really hard to take off without damaging the paper. Now I'm just gonna cover up the back of the album, and I'm gonna use sheet number 5. This is what it looks like, and I want this little piece. I used die to cut out mine, but of course you could just fussy cut it with your scissors. The die I used was a little bit bigger than the cutout, so I kind of have an extra frame around it. And when I was done with the cover, I regretted not taking it off. You just do whatever you think looks best. Now when I'm gluing this on, I am making sure that it's covering, of course, the end of the belt and also the middle of the spine piece that I didn't punch through. But depending on which die or punch you use, it may not be necessary. And I'm just making sure that it's not too crooked before I press it all the way down with my towel. I'm gonna find sheet number 8 again and cut out this little piece that says memories. And I am just gonna fussy cut it before inking the edges. And to make it stand out a little more, I am gonna use some foam tape. I think it's 1 or 2 millimeters thick. After I stopped recording this video, I added a little bit of glossy accents to the nails in the 4 corners of the big cutout and also on the small ones in the little memory sign. And the last thing I'm doing is putting on these small metal corners. And I am using my pliers to open them up just a bit. And when I'm sure they fit, I am putting a little glue inside the corners. Now you might have to use your pliers again to make sure they grab onto the corners of your cover. And that is the cover. I hope you enjoyed the first part of my tutorial. Please let me know what you think in the comments below. This is the first tutorial I've ever made, so there might be some things I could do different for the next one. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you for the patience. I promise that I will upload the next part as soon as it's done.